Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this very special Dal Reads event with the author of Butter, Honey, Pig Bread, Francesca Ekwuyasi. I'd like to start tonight's event with the Territorial Acknowledgement. Dalhousie University is located in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. We are all treaty people. My name is Marlo McKay, and I'm the Communications Coordinator of the Dalhousie Libraries, as well as the Chair for Dal Reads, which is Dal's Unity Reading Program. Dal Reads is designed to encourage people in the Dalhousie community to share their love of books, bringing the Dalhousie community together through the shared experience of reading the same book and taking part in events related to that book, such as this evening's event with Francesca Ekwuyasi. Every year, the Dal Reads Committee chooses just one book that will be the Dal Reads book. And this year's book, Butter, Honey, Pig Bread, is a novel that tells the story, the interwoven stories of twin sisters, Kehinde and Taye, and their mother, Kambirinachi. It is the story of choices and their consequences, motherhood, the malleable line between the spirit and the mind, finding new homes and mending old ones, voracious appetites, queer love, friendship, faith, and family. A couple of housekeeping notes before I turn things over to Francesca. If you want to get closed captions for this event, there should be a button on your screen that says CC. And also, if you want to ask questions, please click the Q&A button to enter your question, and we're going to do our best to get to all of them. If you see a question that someone else has asked that you also want to ask, please feel free to give that question a thumbs up, and that will help us know which questions have broader interest if we have to start limiting the number of questions we can take. It is my pleasure to be here tonight with all of you and our special guest, Francesca Ekwuyasi. Francesca is going to read 3 passages from Butter, Honey, Pig Bread tonight, and with breaks in between each passage to take questions from the audience. And now, please join me in welcoming Francesca Ekwuyasi, who will tell you all a little bit about herself before she reads her first passage. Over to you, Francesca.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you so much, Marlo, and all the folks involved with Dal Reads. Thank you so much for having me here. Yes, my name is Francesca. I'm a writer and an artist, and I was born and raised in Lagos, Nigeria. I've lived in North America since I was about 17, and I've lived in Halifax specifically for about 8 years. Yeah, I'm really grateful to be here. I'm really excited to read for you today from my book. It's my debut novel, Butter, Honey, Pig Bread, and I started writing it in the same year I moved to Halifax. So I started writing it in 2013. And I'm still very much in awe that it exists outside of myself and that other people are interested in reading it. So thank you. Like Marlo said, I'm going to read 3 passages, or 3.5. I'm going to read the prologue, and then 3 passages from 3 of the main characters' perspectives. So Butter, Honey, Pig Bread is a story of a woman named Kambirinachi and her twin daughters, and it's about their relationships with themselves and with each other. I mean, it's not terribly plot driven. It's about a lot of things, but that's the most succinct way I can describe it. So Kambirinachi believes she's an Ogbanje, and the Ogbanje is a spirit that exists in Igbo cosmology, and it means sort of an entity or a spirit that is born only to die again, but in childhood, always in infancy or in childhood. And the idea is that this spirit plagues the parents by choosing to be born through the same family and dying. And of course, that's a very painful thing. Grief is hard. And so this is who Kambirinachi believes she is. So I'm going to read the prologue, which I'm hoping for folks who haven't read the book might kind of situate them in, in Kambirinachi's world. Prologue. We are kin, here at the in-between place. We are one being, eternal, moving in rotation to the flesh realm, only because we must. as sure as the tides, as sure as the sunrise bound to the rhythm of its particular dominion. We must. I is only a temporary and necessary aberration. I, me, such a lonely journey. We separate, single out to eyes and knees, only when we traverse between realms, when we take breath and body, only because we must. But we always return to we. We sing reminders to the eyes. We sing them back home in time. We sing them to a doorway. Death is only a doorway. We are Abanje. Um, I'm now going to read from Kambirinachi's section, so literally the beginning of the novel. And I'll just read about 5 paragraphs. Um, yeah, Kambirinachi. If you ask Kambirinachi, this is how she'll tell it. There was a spirit, a child whose reluctance to be born and subsequent boredom with life caused her to come and go between realms as she pleased. Succumbing to the messy ordeal of being birthed, she would traverse to the flesh realm, only to carelessly, suddenly, let go of living like it was an inconvenient load. Death is only a doorway, and her dying was always a simple event. She would merely stop breathing. It was her nature. The dark tales of malevolent spirit children, Owanjis, are twisted and untrue. It was never her intention to cause her mother misery. She was just restless. It was just the way. The time before her final birth, in an attempt to make her stay, her mother marked her with a red-hot razor blade, just as the Babalawo instructed. 3 deep lines at the nape of her neck, below the hairline, smeared with a pungent brown paste that burned and burned. All this so their Wanje would stay bound to its body, and if not, at the very least, she would recognize it should the child choose to be born again. The child died, of course. She returned again, and maybe she took pity on the woman, or perhaps she was bored with the foreseeable rhythm of her existence, but this time she chose to stay, and the 3 horizontal welts on the back of her neck signified to the woman, her mother, that this was the same child. It might have been a coincidence. Perhaps the woman's mother-in-law should never liked her, found her haughty. Perhaps she'd marked the child in secret to torment her. Nevertheless, for Kambirinachi, living was a tumultuous cascade between the unbearable misery of being in this alive body indefinitely and an utter intoxication with the substance, the very matter of life. When there was peace, life was near blissful, but otherwise, Kambirinachi's childhood was nightmarish for her mother. Ikenna was an exhausted woman, a woman made hard by nearly 2 decades during which her body betrayed her, or, as some might put it, almost 2 decades of being plagued by an abanje that caused her 3 late-term miscarriages, 1 stillbirth, 2 dead infants, and a dead toddler. She used to be much softer, sweeter, kinder, but it's impossible to go through that particular brand of hell and stay untouched. She couldn't help it. She hated the child a good portion of the time, and the child, too, must have hated her after making her wait and suffer, only to wail the way she did, unprovoked, inconsolable, and seemingly interminable. To preserve her sanity and, frankly, the child's well-being, Ikenna retreated inside herself, saving all tenderness for her husband and leaving only a barely concealed indifference for Kambirinachi. I want to I want you to meet Dumpling. She's interrupting.
So Francesca, I don't see any questions in the queue right now, but I thought I would ask you a question of my own that I've had since reading the book. And this particular question, I think, fits really well with what you just read, because you talked a lot about the Obanje element. And I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit more about its significance in Nigerian culture, and just a little bit more about Obanjes, because it was the first time I had encountered it.
Absolutely, yes. I'd be happy to. So the Obanje exists in Igbo mythology or cosmology, and it's understood to be like a spirit, or it's understood. Well, first, on one hand, human beings are understood to like be born and reincarnate in cyclically. So like and I think that's true in many Nigerian cultures. So, for example, in Yoruba, if a grandparent dies, if like a patriarch dies before his grandson or grandchild is born, they name the child for him. So, like Babatunde means father has returned, and so there's that similar belief in Igbo culture that we exist cyclically, and then but the Agbanjes exist, or the Agbanje exists in its own cycle of death and rebirth, which kind of overlaps with ours in that they are born through us and die, and that's kind of their purpose. But they're not to reproduce, because they're not to actually ever live to adulthood. Because doing that and reproducing kind of mixes or combines their like spiritual like destiny or trajectory with that of humans in a way that it's not meant to be. And I fictionalized my account of Cambrianachi's perception of herself as an Agbanje for this book, because it's I think if I was writing exact beliefs, I wasn't really comfortable writing like exact beliefs, because I don't know, there's something about that that doesn't seem like I need to do. So like the core ideas of Agbanjes existing, which is that they're born, they die in infancy or in childhood, or before even developing fully, and it causes pain, and that's kind of the whole idea that remains true. Yeah, that's like true to my understanding of like cultural ideas of the Agbanje, but a lot of it is fictionalized. So Cambrianachi's dreams and the way she sort of straddles both sides and interacts with the world with those, that's like quite fictional. And there's a different version of this idea in Yoruba culture, which is the Abiku. But yeah, there's just many sort of like spirits and entities that exist outside of like human understanding, that exist in like different Nigerian folklore, and the Ogbanje is just one of that. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
That's great. Thanks so much. It's really interesting to learn more about that. I love that your dog is called Dumpling. It is related to my next question, which is that food is so important in your novel, and I'm wondering, why you chose food as a way to connect the characters, and how does food connect the characters to each other?
Yeah, I was really excited. Well, this book was very much just me pursuing my own deep like interests, and like just following my desire. And I love to read about food, and I love to eat food and think about it. I assume everyone does. I don't really know. A lot of people in my life do. But food writing and food TV is something that was like a part of my life growing up. I would watch the cooking shows, the travel shows, the chefs, and I just really wanted to. I loved how they were able to talk about this very mundane thing, because eating is quite mundane. Like we have to, but talking about it like it was special, because it is. And I just always really love that. And I think as like a literary device for me, it really grounds the character in like a reality that like as readers we share. I really wanted readers to like feel what the characters are feeling, and like be really like immersed in the scene. And food, music, emotion, like these are all ways that I think are really great tools, but food is one that I loved very much, and I wasn't really intentionally using it as a literary device. And in the editing process, I was like, oh yeah, no, that's what's happening. But initially, I was just like, well, if I'm writing the daily routine of a human adult, eating hopefully is part of that, right? And for these characters, the lives they have, like eating and cooking and sharing food and all of the things we can communicate through food. And for the three characters, it ended up being like a conduit. Like, it ended up being like a way of communication when words were failing or when words seemed so daunting. Yeah. So I guess, yeah, many answers to the question. I wanted readers to feel their bodies and their hunger and desire, because I love when literature does that, gives me that gift, you know. And I also just wanted to write something real. Yeah, thank you again.
Thanks, Francesca. And I still don't see any questions from the audience, so I'm going to ask you something related to that question. So this was one I hadn't planned to ask, but it just picking up on something that you're talking about, where you're saying that you love to watch cooking shows. And who are some of your favorite celebrity chefs?
Yes, I love this question so much. Thank you for asking it. Should I wait until the red box is on me?
You can just speak. We'll be able to hear you.
Okay, perfect. So I love Anthony Bourdain. May he rest in peace. And I just watched all his different shows throughout I guess, my life. I mean, since I was aware of watching TV. His most recent, before he passed away, was Parts Unknown, and was less cooking. Was mostly just traveling and eating. But he was a trained chef and started out in kitchens, and he writes about that in his book, Kitchen Confidential. I'm just about to start rambling about my love for Anthony Bourdain, but yeah, he made such an impression on me. Yeah. Anyway, Jamie Oliver is someone I had a crush on because his first TV appearance was a show called The Naked Chef. And he wasn't naked. He just the show was about what he cooked for his friends and family. So you would follow him in the markets, cooking for his partner, his family, kids in his family. I just loved that. So you really got to see his personality, and it was really approached like the meals he were making were like fancy and nice, but like he would just like buy this and you do this. So that was one of the earlier. I remember being like a teenager, just like Jamie all over. And Nigella Lawson, my God, she's so beautiful. I think that's mostly maybe why mostly why I would watch it. And she was very like shamelessly indulgent. And I just thought that was so cool because she's like, oh, I love butter, I love honey. And I remember being a teenager and just like thinking about my body and my weight and diet, thinking about all that, and like watching Nigella Lawson just be so sexy about food. But I mean, there's so many. There's Barefoot Contessa. Basically, whatever was on BBC Food and like the cooking channel eventually, because it was BBC Food for when I was younger, and then I think it was the cooking channel later. But like whatever was on, I was so into it. And I was always so excited to see Black chefs and Black cooks. And anyway, right now there's this show on Netflix called High on the Hog. My God, everyone should watch it. It's just one season so far, and it's basically tracking foodways from West Africa through the transatlantic slave trade to the southern U.S. And like one of the host or the person, the traveling person, he publishes a magazine called Whetstone. Oh. It's a food magazine. It's like food. So this edition is like food from India, Puerto Rico, Palestine, Cairo, Spain, and China. And it's amazing. It's just great food writing and journalism and travel. Anyway, so one of the publishers, let me just get his name. If I'm going to talk about him, I should say his name, Stephen Satterfield. He has this show on Netflix called High on the Hog. Just so cool. So cool. Anyway, sorry, I rambled now, but food, chefs I like. There's so many. Those are a few.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that you like celebrity chefs so that I could ask you that question. That was awesome. I actually just finished reading Kitchen Confidential myself, and I really enjoyed it. So I know what you mean. And I think I wanted to ask you about your Canada Reads experience, because it was this year that Butter Honey Pig Bread was part of Canada Reads. And was it a chef that that nominated your book? Yeah, do you want to talk about that a bit?
Yes. Yeah, his name is Roger Mooking. He's my hero because he really got my book, and I'm so grateful for how passionately he defended it. And I think he could because he genuinely liked it. Such an amazing guy. Actually, there's the last passage I'm going to read for you. It's going to be like the section with the twin who is in culinary school, and you're sort of imagining, or as the narrator, I'm describing how she learned to butcher a pig, and what the best cuts are. And Roger was like, your book is perfect. I loved it so much. It was excellent. It moved me, except this part, because this cut is actually not to be cooked that way. So that was really cool to like have an actual chef tell me that. Yeah, it was an amazing experience. I feel so grateful and so privileged, that among like probably I imagine hundreds and thousands of like amazing books that exist. Like so many amazing books were published last year. So many amazing authors were longlisted as well. I'm so grateful that mine was included and reached the finals, which is so cool. Like in the most amazing company. Yeah, that was a lot more attention than I imagined my book would get when I was writing it. And even when it was happening, it was just a bit surreal to think of these people saying my name and like discussing the plot of my book is really humbling. And yeah, I loved it. I'm grateful. I know it's like books competing against each other. Maybe people don't like that, but I didn't really see it that way because the books were all so different. And it's, you can't really, I don't know, not to be like cheesy, but I'm like, I feel like we're all winners.
That
Not
totally
to,
makes sense.
yeah, yeah.
So we do have one question from the audience, Francesca, that I thought we could take before we go back to you reading another passage, if that's okay. Does
Yeah,
that sound good?
absolutely.
Okay. So someone from the audience has asked, how has your culture and experience contributed to the voices of your wonderful characters?
Oh, yeah, I think, the characters, the story, anything I create, in many ways, is completely informed by my culture. Um, which is not to say that I only write characters who are similar to me or look like me or who are from where I'm from, but like I think every culture has its own storytelling practice, and I grew up with like oral traditions of storytelling. So there was a TV show I used to watch with my family called Tales by Moonlight, and it starts. And also when you start a story, like an oral story, you say story, and the audience will respond story, and you say time, and say time, and you I haven't said that since I was probably 12 years old, um, but what I'm trying to say is just the storytelling traditions um, from my culture or from my country show up in my work. I wanted this, but everything I write, I want to be able to I want it to sound like you're being told the story, like you're hearing juicy gossip, or like this person said this. Like that's how I want my work to read, because that's what a good story sounds like to me, because that's what I heard growing up. Um, and yeah, and the language, right? I think there's this I always reference this, and I need to find the linguist's name, but there's this like linguistic researcher type person. I should find her name because I think she's a very prestigious person, um, who basically did this research to show that the language we speak and think in literally informs our point of view. And I think that's true, even though like right now I speak primarily and and speak and work and think primarily in English, even dream primarily in English. I grew up hearing Yoruba and Igbo and Pidgin English, which is like broken English. It's like broken English. It's like patois. It's a mix of English and many local dialects. And so that completely informs the way I see the world, similar to anybody else from any other place. Yeah, I think also think that it informs what I'm interested in writing about. I like to write about diasporic experiences, what it means to like live and attempt to like thrive in a place that you have no claim to, that you are not born in, or that is not your indigenous land, like what that means, what it means to immigrate, to say goodbye to family. It's like there's like a diasporic angst or like perpetual loneliness, and people all over the world do this and have done it historically. And I think, yeah, my experience of that as a Nigerian immigrant shows up in my work. I hope that answered the question.
Thanks very much for that question, and thanks for that answer, Francesca. And I'll invite you to read another passage now.
Absolutely. Okay. The next passage is from Kehinde's point of view, and Kehinde is the younger twin. And the scene is the wedding, or the engagement party of her childhood friend, and she goes there with her husband Farouk and her sister, and this is happening in Lagos. Yeah. Anamoria is a word I found a few years ago on a website called the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows. It means nostalgia for a time you've never known. I scribbled it in my journal, and in the years since, when I started taking my art practice seriously, I would write it all over my canvases before priming. Because even though I couldn't taste the feeling at the time, I knew that I knew it, that I'd felt it before. I feel it again now, at Isabella's engagement party. I taste its full-bodied flavor, pungent and salty. It is unmistakable. I've never been surrounded by old friends and family the way that Isabella is right now, but I feel nostalgic for this moment. I'm watching in slow motion as Isabella, wrapped in a sheer coral maxi dress that shimmers as she moves, her afro a glittering halo, laughs and playfully slaps Toki on the shoulder. Some familiar faces surround her, secondary school friends with whom I failed to keep in touch. Isabella kept in touch. She tended to the garden of her life and grew a community that shows up to her engagement party and packs the backyard dense with swaying bodies. Perhaps this is what happens when you stay home instead of eagerly launching yourself into the diaspora and disappearing from everything that shaped you. You get a celebration, familiarity, home. Isabella spots us and exclaims, Ibeji, the twins are here. She hurries towards us, hugs us, and ushers us deeper into the celebration. Ty's body stiffens at Isabella's touch. I sense it more than I see it. She is cordial when she offers the spiked zobo and smiles politely at Isabella's squeal of delight. Isa, this is my husband, Farouk, I say. Up close, I see that I didn't imagine it. Her hair is dusted with gold shimmer. So lovely to meet you, Isabella says. She waves Toki over. Tokumbo Pedro swam with us at Ikoyi Club when we were children. Unlike most of the boys in our cohort, he wore Speedos instead of swimming trunks. When he wasn't following Isabella around like a lost pet, he swam many laps to the deep end and back, and while the rest of us splashed around the shallow end, the deep end and back, while the rest of us splashed around the shallow end playing Marco Polo. He was such a small-framed, crusty-nosed boy. I remember towering tall over him until I left for Canada at 18. So I am stunned at the broad-shouldered, polished mahogany heft of a man that walks towards us. Toki, is all grown up. Tokes, Isabella says, remember the twins? Of course. His voice is still slightly nasal, a remnant of the sniffly child that vied for Isabella's attention, but more assured. He kisses Taya and me on our cheeks with a distracted, long time, how far? Then he offers Farouk a firm handshake. Long time indeed. I smile and attempt to locate something genuine in the smooth skin of his face, the shallow curve of his distant smile, his commanding demeanor. It's not very difficult to spot a hardened person. Thickening one's proverbial skin can only be a natural response to the causticity that life sometimes visits upon us. But there's a unique type of hardness, a single-minded drive to thrive through whatever the fuck, to tear through whoever, to get what you want, that levels everything so that nothing is sacred. Someone else might call it sharp, masculine, capable of getting anything done. But I knew Toki when we were children, and if you ask me, something happened between then and now that took some light away from him. Perhaps it's just what happens when we grow up. Could he look at me and come to the same conclusion?
Thank you, Francesca. And I see that we have a question from the audience. The person is wondering, earlier you mentioned language, and I was impressed by the way that the sections written in languages other than North American English still conveyed the sentiment so well, even when I didn't know the specific words. Can you speak to your decision to write in that authentic voice rather than translating to a language more familiar to some readers?
Yes. I think that, I grew up, Nigeria has it's a very populous country, and it's the most populous Black nation in the world, actually. So there's just a lot of writers, and I grew up reading a lot of Nigerian literature, and this when I had a choice. Growing up, before I had a choice of what I could read, I was reading a lot of British literature, and I was reading about things I had no way of knowing, and names in languages that I didn't know, like the name Siobhan, for example, the Gaelic name. I think it's Gaelic. Is spelled in like, I guess British English is spelled as Siobhn, but it's pronounced Siobhan. And I was reading that as a teenager and saying Siobhan because I had no way of knowing how to pronounce that. But then, reading Nigerian literature, so was mostly familiar to me, and there's a lot of folklore which is not immediately familiar in my experience, but so culturally, yes. And so when I began to write, from experience, I know that, I read to expand my imagination, and I know my ability to do that is only strengthened when I have chances to do that through reading, through traveling. So I suppose I just trusted that whoever was interested in my work would also be interested to learn something different. I also have lots of examples of that. I have lots of examples of writers, diasporic writers, racialized writers, or even, writers, people writing a story in a context separate from where they're born or what they know immediately. So I have lots of examples of people doing that, conveying meaning through context instead of translation. I think I had a lot of support from my editor whenever something was completely lost. And, she's a Canadian woman. When I was a Canadian woman, like that narrows it down. She's a white Canadian woman who lives in British Columbia and lives a certain type of life, I imagine. Basically, she's not Nigerian, is all that really matters. And so when there was something that she couldn't understand through context, or like just having it being inferred, she would encourage me to open it up a bit more, not by translating, but simply by opening the door just a little bit more. So it's sort of a fine balance between an invitation without pandering, like, you're welcome here, but this isn't necessarily entirely for you. you're welcome, but you're not being spoon fed, I suppose. Uh, yeah, but yeah, I have so many examples of that, in my life, in my reading, my reading career. Yeah, thank you for that question.
Yeah, that was a great question, and it was one that I wondered about too. I found the same thing when I read the book. I just kind of, absorbed the terms that I didn't know, and it didn't cause me any difficulty. Although I will admit, the second time I read through, I did Google some terms because I was
Yeah.
curious. So, kabu, is that an illegal taxi cab? Is that what that is?
You know, it might be actually, but I don't even know. When I say kabu kabu, I just mean like yeah, it's unmarked.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
yeah, so yeah, yeah, it's probably there's some words that I know, but the translation in English, I'm like, what does that actually mean? Like the term shakara, I don't think I used it, but I was trying to explain it recently to a date, what shakara means, and I was just like, oh, it's kind of like playing coy, but not always. I can't really describe it, but when somebody's like doing shakara for you, they're like kind of playing hard to get, but not really, and yeah, coy, I suppose, maybe. It's more than that, though. But yeah, so sometimes there's no there might be direct translations. I just don't know them. I just don't know the word, but I know what it means. And so trying to explain or like in context show what it means. But I Google all the time. Was what actually before when I was younger, before I had like a computer to myself, I would just be reading with a dictionary or an encyclopedia because my grandparents had those. They had the Encyclopedia Britannica, so I would be scouring these like very old pages just to understand words or meaning of things that I hadn't seen before. I didn't know. Yeah.
Thank you. I have one more question, and then maybe we'll move on to the third passage. This is another
Okay.
question from the audience, and it's also been thumbed up, so it seems like more than one person is interested in this.
Okay.
Thank you so much for sharing your beautiful book with us. I would like to hear your thoughts about family relationships, especially the relationship of the twins, but also the parent-child relationships. It seems that there is something about intimacy that creates the opportunity for causing others pain. Could you please comment on these themes?
Absolutely. I think, yeah, I think that last line of the question is exactly it. I can't really be hurt by somebody I don't care about. And yeah, I think I've heard this before, like the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifferent. Because when you hate someone, you're still so invested. Like you still care. So you have to kind of be in mutual care to hurt each other. And like that's just intimacy, right? That's why it's so terrifying. I think that's what's really scary about intimacy, is that you can really get hurt because you can't be intimate with someone if you're hiding. And if you show who you are and you're hurt and someone like lets you down, then like they knew and they let you down. And that's really, really painful. And so I wanted to illustrate that, like the idea of betrayal. What is the closest, other than self-betrayal, what is the most painful experience, or what can be the most painful experience of betrayal? And I think that it's family. I think it's precisely in family. So parents to child, siblings. And I just wanted to take that up a notch a bit and be like twins, specifically monozygotic twins, right? Essentially the same cell that became two people. And what happens when in that inherently intimate dynamic there's this betrayal or the sense of the perception of betrayal? What does that do? And that basically is the crux of the book, is the people we love the most have the capacity to hurt us the most. And what is reconciliation? What does it cost? What can it look like? Because essentially when you truly reconcile, it's kind of taking your armor off again and being vulnerable again. It's scary, it's hard. And for these characters, it took them, up until their 30s, to figure it out, something that happened in childhood. And for Cambrianachi, it took her whole life, really. because yeah, I also wanted to explore that idea of betrayal, of fear and abandonment, specifically in family, because Cambria mother, in her own way, does that. She betrays her kid, she abandons the kid, and it's really, I think I suppose I think we learn how to love from the people who love us when we're children, and also, and I just wanted to explore that. Does that even answer the question? I don't know if that answers the question. I guess that wasn't a question. This is me speaking to those themes. Yeah, intimacy and vulnerability. And we see in one of the characters, in both of the twins, like we see their experiences with intimacy outside of the family, or outside of like their bio family. So for Kende, she had a lover named Wolfie, and it was a beautiful relationship. It was very different than she expected, and she still had to make. But the relationship didn't really save her from anything. She still had to live with herself and her dysfunction and pain. And then we see again her relationship with her husband. And for Tai, there's quite a few more lovers, but it's that same like navigating intimacy, navigating fear of abandonment and fear of betrayal, but still like trying to get to like love. Because yeah, I think that's maybe the main thing for all three characters, is just like really trying to get past the muck to like love. I think. I don't know.
I think you spoke beautifully to those themes. So thank you for that answer. And I'll invite you to read another passage now.
Yes. So this final passage is from Tai's point of view. And I'm just going to read. Yeah, I'll read the full page. So this is the older twin, Tai. She is, in this part of the book, she's in Halifax, and she's relatively new to the city, and she's taken a course at NSCC, a culinary course. But she's sort of coming to terms with a lot of her loneliness, and she just left London on like a really kind of devastating note. But yeah, let's just read. Halifax is a small city, beautiful and old. If you visit during the sweltering height of summer, you can prance along the crowded boardwalk. Sorry. You can prance along the crowded boardwalk and sway your hips to the music of many buskers performing in the salty breeze of the harbor. You can stop along the waterfront for a variety of full-fat ice creams, salty, saucy, cheesy poutine, sugar-coated beaver tails, fish and chips, and an assortment of taffies, cakes, and sweets. Downtown, you can visit the public gardens, where you may enjoy the pretty flowers, the fountains, a fat, bumbling geese enclosure. If you wander north to any of the many microbreweries and bistros, it might be difficult to ignore the glaring scars of gentrification, but you must, if you have any intention of savoring your Jonah crab bao or your mezcal and tepache cocktail. And if while nursing the aforementioned cocktail, you start to wonder where all the Black and Indigenous people are, well, we'll have to get back to that. If, like Tai, you turn up in September and are lulled into sentiments of warmth and wellness by all the torrid gorgeousness of red oak trees aflame in autumn, don't lose hope when the brittle cold descends swiftly and without notice. If you feel discouraged by the severity of that wet winter cold seeping right down to your core, hold tight until spring. It all comes alive again. In the meantime, there will be hot tea, wool socks, warm bread, and soups to tide you over. By mid-March, after a lonely Christmas that included Catholic Mass, a 2-hour video call with her mother, and the drunken preparation of a Christmas feast that she lived off of for a week, Taya found her rhythm, just as the air started to warm and the trees slowly coat themselves in green again. Her culinary skills program was chugging along. In a protein and sauce foundations course, she learned the basic techniques of butchering a pig and how best to cook its various cuts. The first step is to break the hog down to its 5 main cuts: shoulder, belly, loin, ham, and head. Then you can whittle the beast down further to steaks and chops and bacon. Cuts like loin, sirloin, spare ribs, and shoulders are ideal for roasting, whereas the blade steak, chop, tenderloin, and arm steak are better braised. Pan broiling ham slices and bacon does these cuts the most justice. Very little is wasted, especially not the fat. Lard, Tari discovered, was much less challenging to make than she'd anticipated. It was, in fact, a simple matter of using the leaf fat from around the pig's kidneys, as this particular kind of fat produces a versatile, white, and mildly flavored lard. First, you must dice the fat in, in small pieces, or perhaps grind it up. Then place it in a heavy pot, something that distributes heat evenly, like a cast iron Dutch oven. Simmer over low heat. The fat will begin to melt and it will smell blissful. Then the cracklings will sink, rise up again, and start to crackle and sigh. Only then can you turn off the heat and thoroughly strain the oil. Good lard is divine, unless you take issue with the killing and consumption of sentient creatures. Tai had no problem with it. Thank you for letting me read that.
That was a great passage. Thank you so much. I don't see any questions from the audience, so I have one that I've been wanting to ask you for a while, and that's about perspective in the novel. So I think you mentioned near the beginning that the novel's written from 3 different perspectives. So it's Cambirinacci, sorry, I feel like I'm saying the names different than you, Kahindi and Tai, the twins. And but you've made an interesting choice with Kahindi's parts, because that's written in first person, and Cambirinacci and Tai's are written in third person. And I was wondering if you could talk more about that choice and why you did that.
Yes. So one of the defining differences between the twins, to me, well, as like constructing characters, is that Tai has no boundaries and Candy is heavily boundaried. And, this is because of a thing that happened to them as children. And I wanted to illustrate that, like, lack of boundaries, or like, not necessarily boundaries, yes, boundaries, but not just that, like a need for control. And so for Candy, throughout her story, that looks like, wanting to be hyper independent, having difficulty accepting care or help, some disordered eating, like around like binging and purging and just control, and also wanting to be in charge of how she's perceived and what story she's telling. And so it felt, it made sense for me to have her speak for herself. Whereas Tai just sort of is a more malleable character. An example of that is that she has an apparition friend and doesn't ever really question that. She accepts her mother as she is. Like, the difficult relationship that Kennedy has with Cambirinacci, Tai doesn't. Tai accepts her mother, though she doesn't understand, but she knows that it is just how it is, and she accepts that, and so has a less contentious relationship with her, spends more time with her. And it's the same in her relationships. And so she, I thought, could be watched. You could follow her, and she would let you in. You could hear her thoughts through her letters. You would see more than what she wanted you to see, right? Where for Candy, I really wanted you to only be privy to what she was telling you. And then for Cambirinacci, that switches. It switches when she gains a sense of clarity, and she wants to be in control. But yeah, those are the reasons for the perspectives. And I struggled, especially in the editing. Like I got some notes and had to like think more intentionally about why the tenses were the way they were, um, and if I was going to change things, which there were some changes. Um, yeah, but I think that's why I really just wanted to have very distinct voices for each character as well. So tense was a helpful way to do that. Yeah.
Thank you. And I will remind the audience that they can put questions in the chat. We're with Francesca until 8 o'clock this evening, so you still have a chance to get a question in. But in the meantime, I'd like to ask you, you mentioned talked a little bit about your writing process, but I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about your writing process. I know from the acknowledgements in your book, you went to a lot of cafes while you were writing Butter, Honey, Pig Bread. But yeah, if you could I'm just interested in kind of like a typical writing day for you.
Right. Yes. And I think that's so this book didn't have a typical writing day at all. Because I started it in 2013. I wasn't really sure where I was going with it, but I knew like specific themes I wanted to explore. And from 2013 to 2020, when it was published, I grew up in many ways. I mean, I still have lots of growing up to do, but I think, I came to grad school. I moved to Canada, went through grad school, went through an immigration process, worked a job I hated, worked a job I loved, and all this time is writing. So between shifts, between classes, whenever I could, yeah. So what the ideal writing day that I'm trying to have now for like to have a consistent writing practice is to wake up early, because I am not a night person. I can't really focus in the evening or the afternoon, but in the morning I feel like more energized, and there's something really that feels kind of magical about when it's dark out and I'm inside and it's not night. So I'm trying to write a few hundred words every day. I think regardless of the structure of my writing, the things that are necessary, or the structure of my writing process, the things that are necessary is like reading and researching and like basically like being alive, being alive. I'm like really just trying to be intentional about like experiencing art and experiencing life and being open. And I say all this like very aware of the fact that like um exhaustion is a real thing, and it takes a certain kind of privilege to ponder, I think, which is not necessary. I don't think that's a good thing. Or but yeah, so while I was working on those jobs, like grad school, but it felt like a privilege to me because I got to like ponder. I was able to do jobs I didn't care about, but that left my imagination free. So yeah, so the researching and reading and kind of being awake to the world. Reading is crucial. Taking lots of notes for me. Listening to music. Some scenes, especially the more like slowed down scenes where it was just a lot of conversation, I had to listen to music to get me in that headspace. So certain types of music that might be playing in a scene like that. Yeah, it sounds all very it's like soft work. Yeah, I think that answers a little bit.
It does. Yeah, thank you. And that you like to write in cafes too at some point.
Oh yes, I love to write in cafes and bars, so much, because I used to live alone and I had no Wi-Fi and I didn't have a phone. So I knew that if I went home, chances of me leaving again were slim. So I would go after work to bars. The Foggy Goggle one was still on Argyle and Obladi, actually on Barrington. I spent a lot of time there with my laptop. Every cafe in the city, I spent hours, I think. But yeah, being in public but alone is really great, I think, for me. Because I'm writing about people, so I need to be able to see people. Yeah.
That's great. So now when I go to some of these places in Halifax, I'm going to think, what part of Butter Honey Pig Bread was written here?
I wrote lots in Java blend too.
It looks like we have something from the audience here. They're saying, I don't know if I have a question about this, but I loved the way that there were elements of the book that felt very familiar, like descriptions of Halifax, the experience of queer desire, and the complexities of family relations. And there were at least as many aspects that were novel to my experience: the newcomer experience, Nigerian culture, being a twin. I really appreciated that mix and the balance you achieved. Was that a struggle to achieve? Was that balance conscious by design?
Oh, thank you so much for that question. Um, and I don't think it was conscious, but I think it was intuitive. And I also think that the editing process makes things seem so much more polished than they initially were. And in terms of writing about like location, writing about places, I love that. I love. I read a book when I was 15. It was by an author named Sefieta. It's called Everything Good Will Come. And even though she was writing about my neighborhood like decades prior, it was like it came out but she was writing about like in the past. But it was amazing to recognize it, to like know what she was talking about. And I hadn't had that a lot up until I was a teenager. And that was very compelling to me. It made me way more invested in the story and made me way more interested in the character. And so when I'm writing characters who are like moving through these different places, I want to go there and see and write it like I know it. And in order to write like I know it, I kind of have to know it. Even if that means spending like 3 weeks in a place, or if which I did. Thankfully, through Arts NS, I was able to go to Montreal and just like hang out in the archives and see what the city would have looked like at a certain time, and walk around different neighborhoods and talk to friends who are from Montreal, who helped me like take out um, ideas, because I just one of the characters that lives in Montreal at the time, and I was going to have her live somewhere that made no logical sense. And I had a friend who grew up in Montreal say like, there's no way an international student would be living in that neighborhood, and that was really helpful. So I'm glad that it feels familiar in places, because that part was intentional, wanting it to feel real and be grounded in an actual place. Um, yeah, but in terms of like the relationships between people, like dynamics, I really love to write about people. I'm very interested in people. I wish I understood people. I want to understand why people do what they do and what people are thinking. And so I think maybe that shows up a bit, because it's just why human beings are fascinating. We're so irrational, but we pretend. We're completely superstitious. Like we keep making God throughout history, throughout, different cultures. We like keep making God with different faces, different types of gods, and fighting over it. And science is all just like hypotheses, and then we test, which is cool. I love science for that. But even that isn't like, it's not solid. We always get new information. And so I love to write about the contradictions of being a person and trying to love another person, or even just coexist. So maybe that's what shows. Again, not necessarily conscious or intentional, but my interest. And it shows up even. And then now I get to be like, oh yeah, I guess I am into that, because obviously I wrote a whole book that is about that. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
Thanks for that, Francesca. And that was a great question. I think you said something like the contradictions of being a human, and I feel like that could be a title of a book. So maybe I'll write a book about that someday. So I just wanted to thank you so much for being with us this evening. I feel like I could listen to you read all night, and I feel like this conversation could go on. I have more questions for you, and I'm sure the audience would have more questions, but we're also respecting your time and know that you can stay with us all night. And I also want to thank our audience for joining us tonight and for your very thoughtful questions. And on behalf of Dal Reads, I also want to thank the production team that made today's event possible. So I want to thank Kiwoba Carter, Shelley McKibben, Michelle Pond, Jolene Reed, and DAO's video conferencing coordinator, James Wilson. A recording of this event will be made available on the DAO Reads page in the coming days. Good evening, everyone, and thanks again.
Thank you.